Hello and welcome to our lesson series on Microsoft Excel 2013. And today we are talking about formulas. Oh, formulas, math, logic, all things that make me happy. There's nothing quite as satisfying as creating an Excel spreadsheet that has all sorts of logical equations and, well, okay, maybe that's just me, but that's a little bit because I'm a nerd. But you might notice I'm not looking at Excel. I'm looking at Microsoft Word because I have a document and all I want to remind you of is BEDMAS. BEDMAS is an acronym that you should all remember from math class, which reminds you what the order is of operations in solving a mathematics equation. So you have brackets, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. And you have to remember this because with Microsoft Excel, it will always do anything, whether that's math or logic, in that order. So really, really important that you have this memorized, BEDMAS. Otherwise, your formulae will probably never work. So, right here I've got our lesson 5 practice document open, and you again will have to copy it and into a new assignment. So you're going to go to new document, you're going to create an Excel workbook, and you're going to call it lesson 5. Oopsie, that's too many S's. Practice. And you are going to copy the text or all these numbers from my workbook and into yours. Now it should look completely familiar to you because we just finished using it. This is back in its more or less native form, but and that's just because we don't need all that fancy dancy borders and stuff to work with equations. So, how do we use formulas within Excel? Well, here's the great thing. With Excel, pretty much all you have to do is start typing, and Excel will probably try to figure out what you're doing. Well, almost. It's not exactly that simple. So if you were to start typing, let's say a multiplication, 25 times 15, nothing happens. By default, Excel is recognizing this as text. So in order for it to recognize that you are making an equation, you are telling Excel, I want this cell to equal 25 times 15. So in order to do that, you actually have to start off with equals 25 times 15. Bingo, the math is done for you. Now what you'll notice is that even though this cell says 375, the cell is what's called an output. So what you see as an output, the input is here. This is the formula. So when I click up in the formula bar, the cell reverts to its incomplete format with just the input. As soon as you hit enter, you end up with the output. Formulas are entirely dynamic. Okay, so what that means is that you can have formulas that change all sorts of cells all over the document all at once, and they update live, which is fantastic. It means you can have really, really complex relationships of cells within a single spreadsheet, and there's lots of reasons to do that, and budgeting and having to deal with percentiles and stuff like that is part of that. Percentages, sorry, not percentiles, this is not statistics. So, there are several major formulas. So aside from, or there are many major formulas, but aside from doing basic math, so if we wanted to show you a couple more, if you want to do equals and you want to have division, if you want to have 15 divided by 2.78, division works as well. You can have subtraction, and always works. So if you ever need to edit the contents of a cell, you don't want to change this 35. You want to actually double click on the cell or click on it and then work from the functions toolbar. So now we've got past that basic stuff. Let's talk a little bit how BEDMAS affects this. So let's say you have a complicated or maybe just a complex equation like 35 times 15 minus 2 divided by 4 times 15 plus, well, that's not, we used 15 already, times 12 plus 1. And I didn't put my equals sign, so I got to do that. And what you're going to get here is the wrong answer. You're going to get 520. And that's because this order of operations is entirely wrong. You're going 35 times 15 and 2 divided by 4 times 12. And you're subtracting 2 divided by 4 times 12 from 35 times 15, and then you're adding 1. Like, it's just madness. It's completely out of order. So what Excel is seeing is it's seeing, let's copy this. I'm going to put it here. Oops. And we'll edit it. So what Excel is seeing, I'm going to use brackets to show you what's happening. 32 times 15 and 2 divided by 4 times 12, and then it's adding 1, and it's subtracting this amount. So it's completely bananas. You can't. These orders of operations are gonna make things absolutely nuts. So if you were to want, say, 35 times 15 minus 2 divided by 4, so 32 times 15 minus 2, for example. Then divide by 4. And then what's the rest of our equation? I'm just going to hit enter here. Then divide by 4, and then multiply times 12. And that's okay. We can do that because they're the same operation. Division and multiplication happen at the same time. Then divide by 12, and then we will add 1. So I'm going to add more brackets. And this might seem really, really complicated. And as an example, all I'm planning to do is demonstrate what happens when you change order of operations by adding brackets. So what this all boils down to is your operations need to be in the right order all the time if you're expecting Excel to do things for you correctly. Because brackets and division and multiplication, addition just changes everything. Anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about some of the basic formulas you're likely to see. So first you have the sum formula. So the sum formula, you don't actually have to just start typing numbers. You can type sum. And as soon as you start typing something, it doesn't matter what letter it starts with, there is probably a function that works for it. And there's a lot of functions. But we're going to talk about some of the basic ones. Sum. You may remember that the sum of something is basically the outcome of adding two or more things, numbers. Excuse me. So if you want to find the sum of these two numbers, for example, you could say equals sum this number and this number. Sorry, this number, and I hit Control and then click the next number. So you see how it says sum, open bracket, number 1, number 2, so on. So what it's saying is this is the format if you want to start adding other things. Because I could do J9 or K9, comma, I could just have number 10, could have comma 115. So if I want to add cells together plus numbers and that sort of thing, close off my brackets. So you have equals sum bracket. And the part of the way that function works is sum is the function name. Equals tells us that we're going to use a function. We open a bracket, which means we want to use the sum function on all of these. So we want to add all of these things together. So we have to close the bracket afterwards and hit enter in order for it to work. Now as you see, my equation still exists, but the output is 291. Now this is what's called a dynamic function. So if I were to change one of these numbers, which this end result is based off of, like this, and I hit enter, it changes the end result of the equation. So that's why using functions within cells instead of just typing in all the numbers and doing the math in your head is the best, because you can end up with, anytime you have to make a minor change in your spreadsheet, you might have a whole bunch of things that are dependent on the numbers that you already have in there, and you'll have to go through and find them all and change them all yourself. This stops you from ever having to do that. It can create some complexity initially when you're beginning a document, but it saves you and gives you much more power in the long run. So you can use the sum function. You may want to, for example, we'll do sum, and maybe I want to add all of these. So I'm just hitting control. I'm just holding down the control button and clicking on each one of those cells, and then I hit close bracket, and I've now summed all of these cells, these 5 cells. You could also do average. So when we're talking about average, we are talking about the mean average. So if you remember your averages, you've got the median, which is in the middle. You have the mean. So the mean average is adding up all of your data. So in this case, I have 5 different numbers. Add them all up, and then divide them by the number of pieces of data you have. So we would add 90, 80, 115, 68, 98, and then divide by 5, and that would give us the average. So what we can do is we can go equals, and we start typing average, and it comes up for us, average, or we just keep typing, and then we open our parentheses, and it's telling us that we need numbers. So I'm going to add this number, hold down control, punch each cell, close the bracket, hit enter, and now we have an average. So employee number 101 average 91.8 transactions per day. Now it is a little bit tedious to click each cell. So instead of doing clicking each cell one at a time, you maybe need to take an average of lots and lots of numbers. So let's say if I wanted to take an average of the whole line at once. So I do equals average, open bracket, and I just highlight the whole range of cells. And now what it says G9, which is my first cell, and then that colon means from G9 to K9. Close the bracket, and now it does the average for the whole range, and as you can see, it's the whole line. Let's say if I want to find the average transactions of every single employee. So instead I go equals average, and I highlight the entire section like that, close bracket and hit enter. The average is 108.4595. Now what's happened is these cells that are blank do not count as 0. If I changed one to 0, it would change my end result. The fact that they're blank means that the average function completely ignores them. Or if they had text in them, it would also completely ignore them. It is looking for numbers only. It ignores anything else. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Now, there's also the minimum and the maximum. So those functions are exactly as straightforward as they sound. So we would type equals min, open a bracket, and we'll highlight the entire range, and we'll find out that the minimum number of transactions that employee had was 68. Now here's the thing, I'm going to zoom in a bit here. You see how this cell has a green arrow at the top corner? That means that it is a cell with a function built into it. Okay, so there is a formula built in, and so that's a good reminder to never change. Just type in a new number. Check your function if you want to make a change first. The maximum function does exactly the opposite. So we go equals max. We do our full line, hit enter, and we have a maximum. Now here's something that I really like. We talked about flash fill and autofill and all that kind of stuff. Well, the great thing with flash fill and autofill is that they can also work to do multiple lines at once. So if we were to go, we're going to do equals sum, open bracket, and we're going to select this whole line, okay, including the blank days, and I'm going to go close bracket, and I'm going to hit enter. Now if I copy this cell, I'm going to hit Control C. I'm not copying this formula directly because that would create the same answer. I'm going to hit Control V, and I've got a different number. Well, how is that possible? if I'm taking the sum of E9 through K9, shouldn't this be the same? Well, as you'll notice, you take a look at my sum E9 to K9. When I click on the next button down, or the next cell down, it says E10 to K10. So what's happened is Excel has seen me copy a function that relies on a certain piece of data, and I've moved that function down one cell. So it's also going to take the reference data, which is all of this whole line, and move that down one cell as well. So if I keep going like this, blip, 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 we end up with changing numbers. So we got sum totals for every single employee that are different, and all I've had to do is do a single equation. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And then we can also add or remove cells from a range. So if right now, if this is my range, I can change the range. So all I've done is, well, maybe I should tell you what I did before I do it, is I clicked on my formula, or on my cell I should say, and I can double click on it, and what it does is it automatically highlights the cells that are being used, and I could shrink it like that. I could add other cells by holding down Control and then clicking on them. Oh wait, that's right, that doesn't work for this function. Never mind. Because it's working only with adjacent data. So that's fine, but it can add more cells by changing that border around data. So yeah, that's pretty nifty. We can do the average too, so let's do average. And we'll highlight the whole range, close bracket, and enter. And again, we can copy and paste down the row. Very nice. And you can do the same thing with minimum, so equals min, equals max. Right, equals min. Equals max. Remember, got to use those parentheses every time. And I should say the reason that you use the parentheses every time is that you can have multiple functions within a single cell. And that might get a little bit crazy, but I'll just show you what I mean. You don't really need to know this at this time, but just to get my point across. So if I go, oops, equals sum of all of these, I can go close, and I can multiply that sum function by the sum. So as soon as I start typing a word again, it assumes I'm using a function of this line, and then I could go ahead and do another operation. I could divide by the sum of this line. Oops, I made a mistake. I forgot to put my bracket. So divide by the sum of this line, and then we will subtract the average. Oops, again, finish typing. Average of this line. So I got a whole bunch of operations happening in one giant thing. Now, I wanted all of these, maybe I want actually to divide by the sum, subtract the average, as opposed to do all these and then subtract the average after. So you use an extra set of brackets and hit enter, changes my end result. So one thing you'll notice though, when you're doing equations, you see how these brackets are red and these brackets are black? Every time you set a new series of brackets, every time you open up a new series, oops, you end up with a new color. And the reason for that is that Excel will give you bracket pairs. So just to remind you that you've opened a bracket somewhere and you need to close it before you finish your equation. So anyways, that's why you want to make sure you're using brackets for your function to tell Excel that that function is complete. So that's about it for there. So anyways, what you need to do now is follow some instructions that I have listed in OneNote, as well as answer some questions. So there will be 5 questions for you. There will be 3 practice questions for you. So follow the instructions on that practice outline. Hand in this Lesson 5-Practice XLSX workbook in your OneNote, and that is your homework. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a line. I will be away for the day, so send me an email and I will get back to you over the weekend. Thanks very much. Have a great day.